And as the war grinds on, many Americans and even some of President Trump's supporters are questioning how it started. It's led to one high-profile resignation and drawn criticism from right-wing influencers who believe Israel pressured the U.S. to join its war, which has raised fuel prices and renewed overall inflation concerns. Well, now Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to tamp down those assertions.
After the Israeli strikes on the South Pars gas field, U.S. President Donald Trump took to his Truth Social network to clarify that the U.S. had no part in or prior knowledge of the strikes. At a press conference, Trump said he urged Israel's leader to stop hitting the world's largest gas field.
I did. I told him, don't do that, and he won't do that. We didn't discuss. You know, we do. We're independent. We get along great. It's coordinated, but on occasion he'll do something, and if I don't like it, and so we're not doing that anymore.
Israel's prime minister echoed Trump's statement a few hours later.
Fact number one, Israel acted alone against the Slawiya gas compound. Fact number two, President Trump asked us to hold off on future attacks.
And he clarified,
America is not fighting for Israel. America is fighting with Israel for a common goal, to protect our future, to protect civilization against these barbarians. And I want to close these opening remarks with one other fake news, and that is that Israel somehow dragged the U.S. into a conflict with Iran. Does anyone really think that someone can tell President Trump what to do? Come on.
And that's the question that many people are asking these days. Can you tell Donald Trump what to do? Well, let's get more on this. We are joined now by Mairav Zonszein. She's a senior analyst with the International Crisis Group. Thank you so much for your time. Who's really calling the shots in the war on Iran? Netanyahu, Trump, both of them?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I am not in the room with either of them, but I do think that it would be absolutely remiss and wrong to think that Netanyahu dragged Trump into a war. The U.S. is a superpower. Trump likes to play with fire. He's done it in Venezuela and other places. He also killed Soleimani in his first term, so this isn't the first time Trump has done something on Iran. It's very much a joint, unprecedented launch of a war. That being said, Netanyahu is a very, very smart and longtime politician, very resilient, and he's dedicated his career to the threat of Iran, and he has, I think, a very clear strategy. And Israel, as we know, has been at war now for 2.5 years, and it has also gained a lot of experience in assassinations, military intelligence. So obviously Netanyahu has more clear strategies, I think, going into this, and it could be that he's pulling Trump in certain directions, but this is absolutely a joint war, and they are both responsible.
Okay, but just one quick follow-up on this matter, and then we'll move on. But I mean, there was surely some back and forth going on, you know, when we look at the messaging between Washington and Tel Aviv. Do you have a sense that they are now better synchronized with their messaging?
I mean, Trump's messaging is all over the place, and he has officials who, since the beginning of the war, have said all kinds of things. I think they clearly didn't, coordinate that well. And I think that some people like to think that there's friction between Trump and Netanyahu, and some people don't think there is. But I think the reality on the ground and the facts speaks for themselves, that they are, clearly in a war together. And using, I think, especially in CENTCOM and Israel's relationship with CENTCOM now, they have like a very, seamless coordination between the armies, between the commands. So this is something that I think is just seamless, that the coordination is quite good, even if they have obviously nuanced or somewhat differences. Certainly on endgame, they might have some differences. But for now, I would say that they are pretty well coordinated.
Okay, let's continue now. And I'd like to turn now to the Iranian attack on the Israeli oil refinery in Haifa, the plant producing about half of Israel's domestic fuel supplies. How much is this a strategic win from an Iranian perspective? And how much pressure would this put on the Israeli government in their war efforts, if these sorts of attacks were to continue?
It's important to point out that it's hard to know exactly how much damage was done. The military censor and in general the crackdown on exact numbers of missiles and impact sites have been very tightly restricted by the Israeli authorities. But there were reports that there was some limited damage there. That is a strategic asset, and it was actually hit in June in the 12-day war in 2025. It's interesting to note that in the 12-day war, Iran had some major strategic assets hit, not just Haifa refinery, but also the Weizmann Institute, and there were a couple of other ones. And this time around, they are firing much smaller numbers of missiles, but I think they're going for a long, protracted war of attrition. And so we're not seeing huge damage. Even the cluster munitions that they've been firing recently, which can spread out into a large area, have actually very small explosions, relatively speaking. So they aren't doing as much damage. The casualty count is relatively low in Israel. But if Iran still does have capabilities, which the IDF says mostly they don't, but if they do, and clearly they have still capabilities, then if they start hitting strategic assets with greater warheads or in greater numbers, that would certainly, I think, be a game changer on some level. And I think Iran, every time it manages to hit something, considering that the US and Israel have so much military superpower and have dominance over the skies of Iran, I think any hit is considered a strategic win for Iran.
We're about to enter the fourth week of the war, and now the question is what the possible scenarios are. One escalation would surely be the possible use of ground troops on Iranian soil. And I'd like to have a listen right now to what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said about that idea.
It is often said that you can't do revolutions from the air. That is true. You can't do it only from the air. You can do a lot of things from the air, and we're doing, but there has to be a ground component as well. There are many possibilities for this ground component, and I take the liberty of not sharing with you all those possibilities.
How risky would it be to have ground troops from both the Israeli and the U.S. perspective?
Well, I don't know exactly what Israeli ground troops Netanyahu might be referring to. He might be referring to the ground troops and the Marines that Trump wants to send regarding Hog Island and the Strait of Hormuz. On the other hand, we've seen surprises, and I think many of us believe that Israel used people on the ground, not necessarily Israelis, but agents on the ground in Iran in 2025. So, I won't rule any of that out, but I don't think that Israel is going to start sending its own troops into some kind of ground invasion in Iran. Iran is a huge country with 90 million people. I just don't see how that would be effective. So, obviously it would be extremely risky and extremely, probably highly ineffective, I think, for the regime collapse that Netanyahu seems to be looking for. What Trump has in mind is a bit different. Also, from experts that I've heard and read about, it would be very risky and very hard to actually forcibly open the Strait of Hormuz with ground troops. So I don't think that the use of force is going to actually create a solution. At this point, it might just escalate further, as we've seen in recent days.
And through that lens, we've been talking a lot about possible off-ramps. Are there any good ways to end this war, in your view?
The minute this war was launched, it created, consequences that nobody can necessarily foresee, although it was clear that things would, I think, change dramatically. And if Netanyahu and or Trump assumed that this would be easy or that the regime would fall, that's clearly not happening. So, the off-ramps that are available, one of them is negotiating a deal. That seems very, very out of hand right now because Israel is targeting and striking, I guess, along with the U.S., the leadership in Iran and the replacement leadership. So they don't seem to be interested in negotiating a deal. And I'm not sure Iran is interested either because it has its own strategic leverage right now regarding the Strait of Hormuz and the global economy. I think any off-ramp would have to include some kind of concession and capitulation of both sides of what it would look like to have a real victory. Or there would be some kind of messy unilateral ceasefire in which things would be precarious for a while, or sort of like a pause that we saw in June 2025. But at this stage, it also seems hard to see that happening just because both sides seem to be interested in escalating. And Israel, certainly I know, is interested in hitting a lot more targets and going as far as it can to degrade as many capabilities as it can. So unfortunately, I don't see the off-ramp soon, but it would require a political decision that further escalation will only get you deeper into a hole from both sides, because Iran is also has a lot to lose as well.
Indeed,
and right now I just don't see that.
There has been this, significant and consistent ratcheting up of the cost of this war from an Iranian perspective, especially, with its strikes in the Gulf that we've seen in the past week, energy facilities as well. So tell us, when does this become so painful for the Iranian regime that it might be possible to get some sort of negotiated settlement?
Well, I work with colleagues who are experts on Iran. I'm not, my file is Israel-Palestine, but I would say that what we've seen is that Iran has prepared for a long time for this kind of situation, and it has plenty of people that can replace people who are being killed, and that it insists, this regime has a very clear and deep ideology, and it insists on certain aspects of its own defense. And it's a country that, doesn't have a lot of defenses. So it's going to work very hard to use whatever leverage it has. I don't see Iran just suddenly stopping and saying, okay, we're going to give in. We're not going to have any program, nuclear, ballistic, nothing. We're just going to be completely vulnerable. I just don't see that happening. I think that already almost 3 weeks into it, we see that that's not the direction that they're going in. So I'm not sure what price this regime would have to pay in order to stop. I just don't see it.
Mairav Zonszein, thank you so much from the International Crisis Group. We appreciate it.
Thank you.